non-members to receive this certificate. We are joined today by Patricia Tritt, who has kindly made herself available to be here this afternoon. So on behalf of all of us at NAEMSE, I'd like to thank you very much for being here today and sharing your knowledge with us. And at this time, we'd like to hand it over to you, Patricia.
Thank you very much. We do have a few poll questions that I'm going to ask to be launched, first of all, but I've also been scrolling through the list of participants, and I see some people that can help me out. I see people looking for people I know, and I see Connie, and I see Terry, and I see some folks that I know, many of you, of course, that I don't, but I'm really going to expect you to jump in and add either in the chat or questions or all the things that I've forgotten about. So this is really one of my favorite topics. As Matthew said, I'm Pat, I'm Patricia Tritt. I'm here in lovely Denver, Colorado today. The sun is shining and I'm not outside, but later I hope to be able to get out there and to enjoy it a little bit. This, as I said, is one of my favorite topics. I've been in EMS education for a very long time. I sort of fell into it. I started longer ago than I'm going to admit to anybody, but I started doing continuing education for EMS agencies, and then one thing led to another, and took over a department of EMS education. We had a really wide variety of classes and courses of all types that we offered, in addition to the continuing education. Our paramedic program was one of the early ones to be accredited. I always tell people the number was 5. So you can imagine now when they're over 700, I really have been around for a while. And the reason I say that is it doesn't make me an expert, but it has given me a lot of experience in dealing with faculty, with instructors, to watch the educational process continue. And so I've found a lot of takeaways. And to me, this sounds like a pretty simple topic, ideal instructor. And I do want to talk a little bit too about terminology. I still hear people talk a lot about, teachers. I've been doing site visits for a long time since our program was accredited. So again, get to see a wide variety across the country. And in many areas, that term is still popular, teacher, and certainly in the K through 12 system. But I really reflect on, can we as educators really teach people? Instructor, I like as a better term, but I also like to think of us as facilitators of education. And as we continue on our journey of trying to change the model and the paradigm of instruction, I really think of us more as facilitators. So Matthew, if you would go ahead and launch the poll, we just want to get some idea about the audience. So do you instruct in EMT or AEMT? Because many programs, of course, do all levels. So, if you would just answer those. And then when you have the results, Matthew. Yeah. Are they populating? There they go. Good. Lots and lots of that core, what I really see as the core education, starting at the EMT level. And then what about the next question, if you would? Do you also instruct paramedics, or do you instruct paramedics? Certainly when we're talking about facilitating education, it's same dynamics that we're looking for. Thank you. And now the next question, please. Are you a program director? And that's program director of any level, any type, but whatever your title is, program director, program manager, that you're responsible for all of for overseeing all of the activities that happen in the program that you work with. Because we're going to talk a little bit at the end about program director. Okay, good. So about 16 of you are. Okay, next question. And have you completed a NAEMSE instructor course or other? Sometimes it's one of the fire service instructor courses. So something that's the equivalent of having had an instructor course. We're so thankful for NAEMSE for offering as many courses as they do, and for making it available in a format. Great, 84%, making it available in a format through virtual reality. Thanks. And then next question. And remind me when we're at the end of our poll questions.
That was the last one.
That was the last one.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay.
All right, thank you. So as I said, think about, are you a teacher? Are you an instructor? Are you a facilitator of learning? Because I really want us to think about being facilitators of learning. All right, let me move this out of the way. I actually would like you to think briefly of go back in your past. What were the characteristics of your favorite instructor? And this could be whether you were in high school, you were an EMT, you were a paramedic class, you were in some kind of college class. What were the characteristics of your favorite instructor? That may seem like an easy question, but hopefully it wasn't something like, well, they were an easy grader, but no, what were some things that, and you're welcome to put those in the chat as well. What made that person not only your favorite instructor or facilitator, but what made them effective? So why were they some of your favorites? I think back, so many things I can't remember, but I think back of when I was in high school and of a physics class instructor that I had, and I still can remember her, I can see her, I can almost hear her voice, and I remember why she was, and that was not an easy subject for me, but I remember why she was such an effective instructor for me. And then the other question is, would you consider them to be a role model? Especially if it's on the EMS education side, where a lot of it is about modeling behavior that we want our students to emulate whenever they get out in the field. So were they a role model? Did you like them because they partied with you after class, or did you like them because they were professional and they really showed you what, what an EMT or a paramedic should be? So think about, what were the characteristics, why, and were they a role model? And these are things I think when I orient new instructors, these are some of the things I like to review with them. You get new folks who are, and maybe they're excited about the role and they've got all these ideas about what they want to do. And how do we get them to focus? The other question, though, I want you to think about is, what were some of the characteristics of an ineffective instructor? Now, this could also be a preceptor. I mean, we certainly have different types of instruction that occur, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's in the lab, whether it's in the field, it's in the clinical area, or it's a field preceptor. So what made them ineffective? Were they too critical? Were they harsh? Did they not give you enough direction, enough instruction? Were they condescending to you? Did they not manage the classroom? Because I find that's really one of the real challenges for folks coming into this, is to be able to manage the classroom. We all know the old saw that, if you're good, good whatever, if you're a good EMT, they'll make you an EMT instructor. If you're a good paramedic, they'll make you a good paramedic instructor. So for me, it's really about, why does somebody want to be an instructor? And I have to tell you, I despair sometimes of the lack of individuals who are interested in instruction. Again, as I do site visits, sometimes when you ask people, well, how did you get, what brought you in to be an instructor, or what brought you in to be a program director? And it's unfortunate, sometimes it's like, I got drafted, or I told I was going to be doing this. And this can be true sometimes with education programs that are located within a service, whether it's fire service, ambulance service, or whatever. Sometimes you just get appointed, and it's not because that's necessarily the path you wanted to take. I joke, and it's not a joke, but when I interview folks for positions, what I really don't want to hear when I say, what interests you in this role? What interests you in this position? And then, what the answer I get is, well, I have a bad back, or I have a bad knee, or I got burned out in the field. Oh, that's really what I want. I want somebody to come in and, be a facilitator for education because they were burned out in the field. And I suspect some of you have gotten some of those same answers. But I love it when I get the answers of, I love it when the light bulb goes off, when I see see the information starting to make sense for the students. I do this because I want to give back to the profession. Somebody took time with me, especially when I'm talking to preceptors, somebody took time with me and, to help me learn. And I want to be able to do that same thing for others. And I've seen people who are doing this for many years who aren't the least bit tired of it. Again, whether it's in classroom instruction, it's precepting, it's like they're not tired of it. They love the skills instruction because it's an opportunity to help those students develop. So the passion to me is really very important, that they have a passion for education. I feel so strongly we need to develop more educators in our field. And I encourage individuals that work for me and then other individuals that I come across with, boy, continue your education, continue that path with various degrees. And I really hope there's lots of opportunities for different areas and different interests, but I really encourage them to go into it from the education side. So that passion and what are their values and ethics? What's important to them? Some of you probably know me, have heard me say this before. At the end of the day, it's always about the patient. So no matter what we do in the education side, again, I work with accreditation, it is about the students, absolutely, but it's really about the patients they're going to take care of. And so we need educators, we need facilitators who are going to help imbue those values and those ethics within our students. And I think another really important trait to me and things that I love about facilitators that I've worked with and I've seen are people who are curious. It's not just enough to know, what's in this textbook, but they're curious. And, when I hope if you're a good educator, when this whole pandemic thing started, you got really curious about the virus, about the pandemic, about the spread, about the public health implications. I hope you've kept up on that. I again, despair at the percentage of folks in healthcare and in EMS who still haven't been vaccinated. And I know that can be a hot topic, but it's a public health issue. It's a patient issue. It's a patient safety issue. So I hope that you remain curious about that and many other things. I joke that I like trivia, and I really do. So I'm very fascinated by a lot of things. I'm curious about a lot of things. Now, if I could just remember them, that would be great. But unfortunately, that doesn't help me very much. And this seems intuitively obvious as well, but we want facilitators of education, we want faculty members who are knowledgeable. And when I say faculty members and educators too, if you happen to be in a clinical coordination role, you're absolutely an educator. Anybody who touches those students is an educator. So having a depth and breadth of knowledge, and we're familiar with those terms from the education standards for students, but it's so important for faculty members as well. No matter what you're teaching, maybe you just have one small area of interest and you just teach certain things in a program because that's your niche. Those are the things that you love. And that's great, but you need to have a greater depth and breadth of knowledge than your students. Well, then sometimes you never go to just one textbook. So a faculty member instructor should never just go, in my view, to just the paramedic textbook or just the EMT textbook. You really need to go much deeper than that. And it's not that you're going to share all that knowledge with students. You want to be able to know the whys and the wherefores. You want to be able to answer questions. You want to be able to point that really, really advanced student in the direction of where they can get more knowledge. It's really not just about sharing facts and information, but as we all know, it's about developing critical thinking and helping the students have a much broader understanding. One of the other soapboxes I get on is we really are a healthcare profession. Yes, I guess you can say it's a technical field, and the word technician is still an emergency medical technician. But I think for us in EMS to move forward, we have to think about it as healthcare and what kind of educational preparation does it take. So I would encourage anybody who's in the instructional business, go beyond paramedic techs, whether it's to nursing techs, medical techs, other kinds of healthcare techs, because there's always things that we can learn. Now, having said, you get a bigger depth and breadth. One of the pitfalls we fall into sometimes is we want to try now to share all that information with students. And that's really not the purpose. That's not what we're here for. So greater depth and breadth, observing and adopting and adapting from other faculty members. I encourage folks, especially when you have some really skilled facilitators of learning in your organization or in your region, listen to them. Sit in and listen on their presentations. Don't try to copy or mimic what they do, but what are the takeaways? Oh, this is a technique that worked really well. Boy, when he did this, it really got the students engaged. Or when she said this, it really made a difference. So adopt what styles that you can. It needs to feel natural, and some things aren't going to feel natural for a while. You know, one of the things is like how you set up your classroom. I'm a huge fan, depending on the size of your group, of course, is to have the open U style classroom instead of the, you know, we're going to have a table behind a table behind a table, and students are looking at the back of each other's heads. So being able to have that more open environment and be able to walk around in the middle of the circle, or be able to walk around the outside of the circle, it's much more engaging than just standing still in front. You know, I always laugh when somebody says, you know, I'm doing a presentation somewhere and somebody says, do you want a podium? It's like, no, that's really the last thing that I want. I might want a table where I can put down some papers, but I really don't want to be anchored somewhere. And unfortunately, in this remote age, we're anchored. You know, we're sitting and we're trying to look at a camera and watch another monitor at the same time. But when you go to conferences, and not everybody has that opportunity, conferences, webinars, whatever it is, you know, observe what they're doing and what works and what you want to adopt. Remaining current, now that certainly goes with the depth and breadth of knowledge as well, but it is important that we stay current on a current practice. When I talk to students sometimes in different places, they'll say, oh, one of the things we really like about this instructor is he or she still work in the field part-time. So they have really current information, and they have current, usually they'll say stories, but hopefully it's cases. They have current cases they can share with us. That's good. I've also seen very effective instructors who haven't been in the field for a long time, but yet they remain current. And maybe they get out and they do ride-alongs, maybe they do other things. They remain current on the current research. We hope that our students will challenge us on particular concepts and not necessarily just believe everything that we say. Certainly, science changes. Those of you who are involved in standardized courses like AHA courses, ACLS, PALS, PHTLS, the content changes, and you need to make sure that you're current in the concept. I just was involved in an interesting project doing a survey on, distance education. And then also we're doing a project on student minimum competencies. We had a list of, here's skills, and somebody pointed out, there's still an outdated term on here. We don't really talk about Heimlich maneuver any longer, for example. So staying current is really important. And of course, going along with that is the research. And we're not very good, I don't think, in EMS about paying attention to research. There are some individuals out there who do a fair amount of research. We really need to, first of all, be able to understand research, but then also get our students interested in it, involved in it. And so that they don't take just a specific factoid, well, somebody said X was what we're now doing. Really be able to figure out how to read research, how to evaluate that. Not a lot of folks get interested in participating in it. Hopefully that you do, but at least that you understand it and you're aware of, what current articles come out, what current research comes out. And then obviously this past year, the use of technology has just been huge. And whether you're using Zoom, whatever platform, you're using Google, you're using Teams. So the use of that kind of technology, the use of other technology, how many people actually set up, and we don't need to set up a camera anymore because you can hand hold it, but actually record students doing skills or students doing scenarios and then play that back. So to use that effectively as a teaching tool. How to record a presentation. I think more programs, more instructors have started in this past year actually recording their presentations. And so, does it need to be a video presentation? Can be an audio presentation so students can listen to that later. It's really very, in a way, and I don't mean to be dismissive, but low-end technology, but it's something that can be very helpful for students. Use of a learning management system. When you're in a college, of course, you're going to be using the learning management system from the college. Being able to use, just simple things like, if they have test scanning, capabilities, those kinds of things. I think though there's going to be, and certainly then in terms of simulation, higher end mannequins, one of the common things that, we as site visitors hear from students is, well, yeah, we got this really expensive mannequin in the closet over here, but nobody ever gets it out and uses it because we don't know how to use it. And if you've been involved with simulation, you know what some of those challenges are. And you don't have to have a real high dollar simulator to be able to do really good simulations. But I know a lot of folks jumped on that, and it is not that they're not great, because they are, but you have to know how to use them. And just like anything else, you have to keep going back to use them in order to be able to be, good at it. I keep thinking someday I'm going to learn to use Excel effectively, but I don't practice it enough, and I don't have to develop the formulas. So unless you keep doing it, you don't get very good at it. So think about what other technologies are out there and that want to adopt in the future. I work with a group who has gotten into 3D printing, and so they're figuring out, let's see, and they showed me an IO bone that they made with a 3D printer, and then they're looking at making skills for their IV arms and so forth. And some of the prices on some of that technology is coming down. So how can we make the best use of it? Some people do really well using, whiteboards, whether it's on Zoom or it's in the actual classroom. But don't use toys just to use toys. Use that to help facilitate effective instruction. And then preparation is really key as well. And you all know, and we didn't ask a poll question about how long you've been in your role, but we know that the first couple of times you have to do something, you have to prepare content, even though the publisher may have all these detailed, instructor materials for you. It takes a lot of time to prepare for a presentation. You want to use multiple resources. As I said, you want to go into the preparation of the presentation with kind of, inquiry. And then you also want to have adequate time allotted for the presentation, or for the preparation piece of it, and for the presentation as well. And as time goes on, and once you've done that topic over and over again, obviously your preparation time shrinks, sometimes considerably. Sometimes you come in and open up the presentation at 15 minutes before you're supposed to start within the class. And we all get there, absolutely. But you also need to make time. If you've been doing this presentation over and over again, periodically you need to check, is there something new? Are there new kinds of research out there? Ask the students those questions as well. So making sure that you have adequate time for preparation. On the administrative side, I think that's one of the things that's really hard, is you have instructors who are new to a topic. Maybe they've been with you for a while. Maybe they've been an adjunct and they've been doing skills for a long time, but now they want to, get involved in the classroom, and maybe they're a part-time employee for you. You can take a lot of time for preparation, and and then there comes to be the delivery piece as well. We've really, I think, in some quarters anyway, tried so hard to get away from I'm going to tell you what I know, I'm going to lecture. I think, especially those of you who've been around for a little bit like me, you grew up, whatever your initial educational preparation was, but you really grew up with lecture. And my least favorite thing in the whole world is sitting in a room that's dark with the lights off and somebody going through slides. And we know our students call it death by PowerPoint, but yet we still do it frequently. And I use slides when I'm teaching in a group. It helps keep me anchored. It helps keep me on track, because otherwise I wander all over the place. It's like squirrel and I'm off somewhere. So yes, I use slides too. And I've really been trying to reduce the amount of information I have on a slide. I really try to just use those more as prompt, and it's much easier for me in person because we can do these kinds of presentations, or any of the classes I do, and I do crisis teaching, is really how to have it as more of a discussion. And I've taken a bit of an aversion to the term flipped classroom, because I think it has some negative connotations for folks. And I don't know about you, but I hear students say, well, we have to teach ourselves. part of that, I think, is a mindset. And I think it's as facilitators, as instructors, as faculty, it's really up to us to help set the stage for what we mean by this type of learning and the science behind it and why it's important. What's the neuroscience behind learning? One of the books that I highly recommend to folks, besides the NAEMSE EMS Foundations of Education, is a book called Making It Stick. And one of the primary, 3 authors, but one of the primary authors is Brown. Yeah, to me, it's a fantastic book. It's based on neuroscience, and it talks about how we learn and how we retain information. And so much of it is really antithetical to, I think, to the way that traditional EMS education has been taught. So I recommend it for all the instructors, for faculty. I know we've really done a lot of conversations and application within the instructor group that I work with, the faculty I work with, and I encourage them to share those concepts with students as well, because it's so huge. And it really is, to me, it's about how do we take that information and have the students apply it. So I did have a student on an evaluation a while back. It was an EMT student, said nobody ever told me I had to open my textbook and I had to spend any time outside of class. And so I think that's all part of how we screen students and take them into our class, and that's a whole other topic. But it really should, we want them to understand they need to do the preparation. Not only does the faculty member, the instructor need to do the preparation, they need to do preparation as well, and then come to class and learn how to apply it. And I think we're still, and the publishers have developed a lot of activities. Some of them work for some instructors, some of them don't for others. You'd probably never catch me trying to, put concepts to a rap song, but what are the activities that work, and to be able to share them among the instructional group. So going from that sage on the stage, I'm the expert, I'm going to tell you what you need to know, I'm going to tell you what to do, to the guide on the side. One of the interesting conversations you get in with instructors sometimes, and probably much less so now in this past year, but before that, was whether or not students can have any electronic devices in the classroom. And you had some that were, nope, they have to put their cell phones in a box or in a bag in the back of the room. No, they can't have a laptop. No, they can't have a tablet. They can't have anything. And then you have others who say, no, I want my students to have devices that they can take notes on if they choose to. I still think handwritten notes are more effective, but some people type. So to be able to take notes, but also to be able to look things up. And one of the really effective instructional techniques I've seen is a student will bring up a question and the instructor will say, hey, let's look it up. Let's go see what, probably not Wikipedia, but I love Wikipedia, but let's go see what research we can find. Having access to online libraries is really excellent as well. It's great to have a library of books and, variety of resources on your campus. And again, not everybody's on their campus these days, but if you can have access to an online library where folks can really go and look up other resources, other articles and so forth. So how do you be that guide on the side? So to me, I don't call it flipped classroom, I call it learner-centered, or how do we engage our learners? And it's about that application, because it will stick so much longer. If I read about this, or maybe I watched the slides, online, I went through this, and now I'm going to come to class and, somebody's going to help me, they're going to ask me some critical questions and help me develop critical thinking skills. And then encourage self-reflection of students and themselves as well. So how did I do as an instructor? Evaluations tend to make many of us nervous. I don't enjoy reading evaluations more than many people do, but it does provide valuable feedback. And you do have to know you're not going to make everybody happy. Much as we try to do the student-centered approach and get the students engaged and explain why to them, invariably we have a few students in class, on their evaluations who say, I had to teach myself, because they want to come and sit in a dark classroom and have somebody flip through a bunch of slides. So we're not going to make everybody happy with that learning style. They challenge the assumptions of students, and sometimes challenge the assumptions of maybe protocols. We know that practice changes. National Registry just recently completed a new practice analysis, practice guidelines, those things change. Talking about, spinal immobilization, and I just having a conversation yesterday that, longboard still appears on, some people's lists, and some places it's still there. Well, it's really about, spinal restriction. How you do it may be a different story, but some places are really is maybe still entrenched in one way or another. So challenging those assumptions, and don't recoil when students challenge the assumptions. That's the time to say, hey, let's look it up. Let's see what the science says. And then a valuable approach, of course, is scaffolding learning, and starting with the basics, and then what do you add on? So one of the challenges I had with some of the online instruction over this past year was where do you go if you have to do all quote didactic, and I try not to use the word lecture because I don't want people to lecture, but how do you do the classroom, all the didactic, and then skills? Because okay, maybe you could do the didactic this way, but you couldn't come in and do the skills. Well, is it okay? And I'm not saying it is or it isn't, but if we say you're doing an EMT class, you do all of the quote cognitive content, and then you come in and do a boot camp for skills. And I know some programs do that and they're successful. Is that how you want to structure your program? To me, part of scaffolding includes, okay, we have some theory, then we have practice. We have some theory, we have demonstration, we have practice. So there's still a lot of those things that we're learning about in our EMS education. And creativity. I work with some very creative instructors. Ideas I could never, ever came up with. One of my instructors, they were doing a mass casualty event, and it was during the pandemic. And he set it up outside. It was nice weather, and he was using a lot of props, and he had some young children. So he was using the kids' dolls and teddy bears and all of these things to make victims. And not only was it very informative, it was a very engaging presentation, and I enjoyed it. And I get a little jaded because I've been doing this for a long time. So really looking for creativity. And one of the things I think we miss in being in a remote environment, and if you've been where you haven't been able to talk much to your other faculty members, is we bounce ideas off each other. And I really want instructors of all types of levels talking to each other, and hey, I tried this and this really worked. Sometimes we get a little territorial about, this is my idea, and this, I'm not really going to share this with anybody because my students like it and makes my students like me, and so I'm not going to share this. We really need to share. And I mentioned earlier, we want case studies, not war stories. One of the things I see not infrequently on student evaluations or when you're talking to students is, well, so much of our skill time is taken up with our adjunct telling war stories, or other students in the class or in this, the session telling war stories. And we love our war stories, but how can we turn those into being case studies? How can we turn those into being examples, being illustrations, but not being war stories? And I'm afraid it is a kind of a frequent complaint or comment of students that our skill time, our lab time, was really mostly talking, not doing. And whoever it was telling stories and not doing. So we want to make sure that all of that content is ahead of time, and then we make the most use we possibly can out of our skills. Those are important to me. Classroom management, I mentioned earlier. I think this is really hard for individuals who come from the field, which so many of our faculty members do. And of course, we want them to have that field experience. So you come from the field, and even if you're really enthusiastic and you're passionate about learning and about helping others, classroom management can be hard. You know that, especially if you have a large class, large cohorts. And it's so important that we have consistent application of policies. If you have a grading policy and you say, well, I know that after, 2 attempts, or after you fail your second high stakes exam, you're dismissed from the program. But boy, this student's been good in so many other ways. And we want to give them another chance, a third chance. Okay, but just know that one's going to come back on you because somebody else is going to hear about it because they're going to tell somebody else. And it may be a couple classes later, you go to dismiss somebody because they failed their second high stakes exam, and it's going to come back that I know you've made exceptions to this policy before. So as hard as it can be, we want to be consistent, and we want to have a consistent application. We don't want to be draconian, and obviously we have to take into consideration certain extenuating circumstances. I know we had to make some extenuating circumstances for during COVID. But we had a written policy around that then we can point to if this is the reason we made this particular exception. Use of time. Oh my gosh, time management is hard for all of us, especially when you come from the field. And I know we also have nurse educators that come into our world, and oftentimes they're from the emergency department. And when I look at it, it's like, well, all you need to do is plan on what you're going to do for the next 10 minutes, till you get your next call or till the next patient walks in the door. You don't have to be figuring out what your schedule is going to be in 6 months, or what the schedule for this particular class is, or heaven forbid, now we're planning on next year's cohort already. So use of time, and it is so easy to have your time just all absorbed by your role. And that may be the old rule, and talk about management, 20% of your employees take 80% of your time. Well, 20% of your students oftentimes take 80% of your time as well. So knowing where to spend your time wisely, both in terms of preparation, of student tutoring, student monitoring when it comes to clinical and field. So one of the reasons I think we tend to have a short lifespan in EMS instructors is you just feel like the job takes all your time. And you've got to be able to balance that, whether you're part-time, full-time. And of course, a lot of folks who are involved in EMS education, have maybe a full-time job or a part-time job in an EMS service or agency, and then they are instructors on the rest of their time. Well, hopefully they have a social life and a family life, and they have other things as well. So it's you start to resent, you start to resent the job if you feel like all of your time is being spent there. So that's one of the things that certainly as a manager, supervisor, and even as a coworker or peer, to help people manage their time. And then another part of classroom management is holding the students accountable. If you have deadlines, everybody has to meet it. It can't be just a few. Everybody has to meet it. Goes back to being consistent in your application of policies as well. I always advise when you're starting a new class or cohort, and that can be whether it's a 2-day, maybe you're doing standardized courses and you're doing a 2-day, class. I like to set, ground rules at the beginning of the class. First of all, I have them set ground rules. What do you want the ground rules to be? And they're usually things like, coming back from breaks on time, being on time, getting your assignments in on time, etc. But if you've got a policy that says, you have to do these online quizzes every day, and yet you don't hold them accountable for it, the students, it does not lead, it's not going to lead to their success. And, other students are going to resent it. So classroom management, both whether in the virtual environment, which is even harder to manage, when you're in the physical environment, if you have, you have students who are having a sidebar conversation, or, they're not participating, they stand back in labs, that's easy to address. If you've been doing online instruction, that's harder to address for sure. But your students expect you to manage that classroom. They expect you to not allow, 1 or 2 students to hijack every conversation. So difficult skills to learn if you haven't had to do that before, but very important. Continuing professional development, I've touched on that before. We ask about how many folks have had, a formal class. Certainly, we think degrees in education are great. There are, in addition to, to NAEMSE, there's other areas where you can get, webinars, CE. I think one of the benefits of the pandemic has been a plethora, really, of webinars from different sources, and in fact free, where prior to that, most of the things I seem to see anyway were ones that people charged for. So webinars, and whether or not you get a CE certificate for it, up to you, and whether or not you need it, and whether or not that's something that your state requires. But for me, it's about the information. I don't care about the piece of paper. I also don't have to provide it to anybody, but to me, it's really about the information. And then conferences, and, we all want to go to conferences. We know that things have been, virtual. I'm actually attending, I'm double booked here, and I'm attending the World Congress on Stress, Trauma, and Coping virtually. We had the NAEMSE conference virtual last year, which I thought went very well, and I was very appreciative of. We have our accreditation conference next week. So sure, conferences are not as fun virtually as they are to be there. They're less expensive because you're not paying for hotel and airfare, but that's a good way to get continuing education as well. And it's also a great place to do what I mentioned earlier about observing other instructors, what you want to take away. And some things may be like, oh, I never want to do that. And I will tell you I think one of the most effective and scary things to do is to have yourself recorded and to watch it, because most of us, I won't make sweeping generalizations, but most of us really don't like to see ourselves played back, and we don't like the sound of our own voice. But very importantly, we find oftentimes mannerisms that we have that we had no idea that we were doing. Maybe you're saying, every sentence. I certainly have things that I do. And so it is helpful to watch yourself, as painful as that is, and to get some honest and valid feedback from your coworkers. So scary thing to do a presentation in front of other faculty, in front of other coworkers, but I got to tell you, I think it's very, very helpful. Membership in professional organizations like NAEMSE, for folks who are interested in simulation, there's the Society for Healthcare Simulation. So think outside the box in terms of what do you think would really help you develop. Consult with other members in your own faculty. And I know that our programs, whatever level you're teaching, oftentimes feel competitive with each other in our area, but I really encourage conversations, and it really, hopefully you can have a good network and you can all contribute. Practice we talked about, so keeping your own skills up, keep studying and improving in your particular areas, and become experts. You don't have to be an expert in everything, but certainly have areas of expertise. That reflection that comes not only from after you're done thinking, how did I do? Ask other people, can you please give me feedback? And getting written evaluations. I know that's just in many programs, well, that's just more paperwork, but I think those evaluations are really important. And I recommend that if you're doing, whether you're doing EMT or paramedic, that a couple of times during a course that you have evaluations, and ask your students to provide some constructive, honest feedback. I don't find it helpful to do just one evaluation at the end of a course, because by that time it's too late. So if there were things that were really bothering the students about the instructor, the faculty member, it's too late to do anything about it then. So be open to that, reflect yourself, be open, obviously continue our own learning. And if you can find a mentor, particularly when you're new, if you can find someone to mentor you, and that may not be whoever you report to, it may not be the EMS chair or the program manager or whatever the roles are there. It may be somebody outside of that, but somebody who can really spend time with you, give you honest feedback, and help you develop in a very sort of non-competitive environment. I really encourage you to do that. We've talked at different times through NAEMSE and other places about having a formal mentoring program, or being able to match people up with mentors. There's really not a formal program that I know of. I think NAEMSE was working on something, and you also have to be a good fit. So you also have to be aware of that match. Be sort of like a student and a preceptor. You want them to really be a good fit. And then some other things, obviously, that are important are communication and being respectful. So much, we are focused so much on diversity and inclusion these days, and we really need to be reflective on, is my environment, is my campus, is my program, are we open? Do we try to recruit for diversity among our faculty as well as among our students? And then when we do, are we respectful? Do we make that an okay environment for everybody to be in? And I tend to use the word safe, where everybody feels safe. It's important to be tactful but direct, and I think this is another thing that can be really hard for new instructors coming in, where they came from the field and maybe it just wasn't something that they had to do. And then obviously being professional and all kinds of communication. So your verbal, your written, your nonverbal communication, which is huge. Coach versus mentor in terms of being a facilitator of learning. Think about what your role is. I see it more with students as being a coach. For one thing, you probably don't have the time to be that longer term mentor. So again, teacher, coach, or I would look at that as instructor, educator, coach, and mentor. It's hard when you come into this role new sometimes to set boundaries with students. I tell folks, you are not their friend. You want to be friendly, but you are not their friend. And that goes for simple things like I discourage people from being on Facebook with their students. Now that's, again, could be a controversial topic, but once they're done with the program, fine, but be very careful about chat groups you get in with students and so forth, because you need to be able to set those boundaries. You need to have good conflict resolution skills, really challenging. And that can be conflict between students. Sometimes you get it particularly in your squads or in your activity groups. It can be among faculty members. And if you're in a leadership position, certainly within your faculty. So conflict resolution, and then of course being culturally aware. And I know I've got a long ways to go to be as culturally aware as I think, at least of baseline of where I need to be. So that's just that diversity awareness is huge. We implemented some diversity inclusion process throughout our entire programs, because it's not a one-time topic for students. This has to be in the fabric of the program and of the organization that you work for. Feedback I've talked about, feedback to students is very important. Feedback from students, how are we doing? We're going to tell you how you're doing, but how are we doing? And some of that's the evaluations. Sometimes programs will just at the end of the day bring in some pizza and say, okay, let's just talk about how this program is going for you, how this class is going for you, what's working well, what isn't working well, what can we change? And then frequent and fair evaluations. So throughout the program, and I've already touched on that as well. Organizational skills are very important. As I mentioned, when your job previously was I just have to wait for dispatch to send me on the next call, that's different than I got to organize my workload. And you do have to have attention to detail, whether you're whatever part of instruction you're in. Use of time we already talked about, and then being able to develop or effectively use materials like syllabi, schedules, etc. And those are whole other topics and webinars in and of themselves as well. If you're just using them, great. Make sure you keep them up to date. But if you have to develop them, takes a little bit more thought and experience. And I mentioned also that experience and that clinical competence. And you definitely want your students to see you as being clinically competent, whether you're currently working or not. And then that instructor experience, the typical pathway, and this isn't always the case, but individuals express an interest. Maybe if they were a preceptor and they say, hey, I'd like to get involved in doing skills, the skill labs for you. So that lab experience, and then test the waters with doing some presentations in the classroom, and then progress on to, hopefully full-time instruction, and then to, or full-time coordination as well, clinical and field coordination. So progression is the normal path, but, it's not always the case. Mentors, I mentioned that, find one and then be a mentor for others, whether it's within your own organization or without. Don't be afraid of that sort of the competition bias. So, what does mentoring involve? Providing motivation and advice, and helping, celebrating success when that's occurred, helping give direction when somebody may be struggling. Maybe they're struggling with time management, coaching them on, here's some suggestions that I would make. I try to make it not about this is what I do, but these are some suggestions that other people do. Just being there for support. And oh my gosh, I got these bad evaluations and students didn't like the remote learning, and I did the best I could. And sometimes it's a matter of support. We always have to look at what's the takeaways, but then also, what do we want to change, if anything. And then sometimes we need to reset our goals, and maybe the goal becomes, I want to go get my degree in education. And then, other kinds of in-service training, et cetera. So find a mentor and be a mentor. I think in EMS, we have a long ways to go in doing that. I'm going to talk just a little bit about program director. I'm being a little bit sensitive to time here. Any comments or questions? Matthew, anything from the chat, which I haven't been able to watch, but anything you want to bring up or any? No? All right. All right. So let me just, we'll circle back to questions and some additional comments. So, the attributes, they asked me to also just touch on attributes of a course or program director. This is probably a 2-day class in and of itself. I do think experience in the role of instruction. So all of the previous things apply. I think it's very helpful if you have probably a couple of years of being a faculty member and hopefully full-time. I think a couple of years is good. Sometimes we know that doesn't happen. People get promoted or volunteered, or they volunteer and maybe they don't have that, but you do want that experience. I think some of the additional things is being able to keep the big picture perspective. And it's not that that's not true for all levels of facilitation, but the big picture, both short and long term. So short term, that shorter timeline. One of the questions we ask programs when they go through a review process is, what's your long-term planning process? It's hard oftentimes to see beyond today. I have to cover the schedule because I had some adjuncts call off, and I have this to do and this to do and this to do, and we have interviews for the next cohort. So it's so easy to get so caught up in the short-term timeline that you don't have to do any of that longer-term planning. And we know that staffing is really a huge issue in EMS programs, and because they are so labor-intensive compared to if you were teaching a math class, you were in a math department, that would be very different. But so we may not require progress, progress, we need to stay on target. Long term, we need to review regularly. I just tend to think annually. That's why we have things like, our annual resource assessment that we do at the paramedic level. So we want to do that longer term annual, but set smaller periodic goals, and that may require reevaluation. I'm not a big fan of, 5 and 10-year goals now, because who knows what the world's going to be then. But we definitely want to know what we're going to do next year and figuring into the year after that. So both short and long-term goals, and for program director as well as other faculty member too. And the things we talked about before, especially for the program director, program manager, EMS, chair, EMS director, whatever, EMS chief, whatever the title is, that attention to detail is huge. So you really are responsible for overseeing what others are doing, not micromanaging, but overseeing. And that attention to detail is huge. And then use of time. Where are we spending our time? Are we allocating it appropriately? Scheduling and schedule out. I really firmly believe that whatever course you're doing, EMT, AEMT, paramedic, the entire schedule should be plotted out. You should know who's teaching what and what days. You should know when your high stakes exams are, when your quizzes are, when your labs are, what your labs are. Because one of the comments I hear about labs is, well, nobody seemed to know what we were covering today. And I hear that both from students and I hear that from the adjunct instructors, because they were told to show up today, but they actually don't know what it is they're supposed to be doing. So having that scheduled and that attention to detail. And then you get the pleasure of budget as well. So whether or not you are developing the budget, you usually have input into it, particularly in terms of supplies and equipment that you need. And supplies have been a challenge this past year, however 14, 15, however many months were going on, because sometimes you just couldn't get the supplies. Even if you could be on campus, you didn't have the PPE that you needed. But the other part is monitoring your budget and using the money that you are allocated widely. And of course, what type of organization you are in is going to really depend on your role in the budgeting process. With that time management, it's juggling the various responsibilities and protecting time for program maintenance, so that when you look at, these are things I need to accomplish, like maybe you've been asked for, to do input into the budget because your, budget year is coming up. Putting time on your calendar to say, I'm going to spend 20 minutes, 30 minutes really going through our equipment to see what we might need to request for next year. So it's not always a last minute thing, but protecting time for program maintenance. Maybe you want to put time on your calendar. And for me, that's the easiest way to do it, because otherwise I'll forget about it. And having it on a to-do list isn't very helpful, because I just, keep on going, on down the list. So protecting that time for maintenance and making sure that you indeed are on top of things. And then evaluation of the program. And I said about getting instructor evaluations, depending on how your program operates, I think it's good to have evaluation of the different phases. Certainly at the paramedic level, we want evaluations for the classroom, the lab, the clinical, and then the field internship as well. So we want to evaluate the sites we're using. We also want to evaluate, get information. And your advisory committee, depending on the environment you're in. If you're a paramedic, you have to have an advisory committee. If you're in a college, no matter what level you're teaching, you need to have an advisory committee. So getting information from them is very helpful too. And so is it from your clinical and field sites and your employers as well. Coaching staff is a big part of your responsibility as a program director. And there's just a little schematic on, a 4-step coaching process. So, connect with your staff, which has been much harder with COVID. But honestly, I've seen some programs that have actually increased their faculty communications during COVID because they made sure that every week they had a huddle, or sometimes every day or every class day they had a huddle at the beginning or the end of the day, or both, to talk. And some of them were honestly talking more than they were before and sharing information. So building that trust and positive relationships, focus on what's going on now, identify, topics that need to be discussed. Developing a plan of action where needed. It's one thing to identify issues or things you want to address. Having a plan of action is the next very important part. And then review, clarify agreements, discuss accountability. So those are some additional responsibility. Counseling students and staff, that's one of the things that most of us don't like doing. And it is about counseling students, but it also is about counseling staff and providing constructive feedback. If you have students coming to you with complaints about an instructor, whether they're an adjunct or whether they're a regular member of your group, your faculty, having an appropriate approach for counseling is helpful. And if you're in an organization that has a human resources department, I encourage you, if this is something that's new for you, if this is something that's really uncomfortable for you, talk to them and get some tips. Relationships with administration are really important. We don't want to be a silo. So if you are the manager, whatever your title is of that department, you want to make sure that you have good relationships and frequent conversations with the person that's above you so that they know about you and your department and what you're doing and they support you. And then that goes on up the chain as well. So that the programs I love reviewing are the ones that are so embedded in their organization and the whole organization is proud of them and know what it is that they're doing. So don't be a silo, work with others as well. Knowledge of regulations, state and local regulations, that's been so important this past year because regulations have changed. And it's not just been the state regulations, but in some places it's been county, it's been their local NAEMSE, it's been, whatever the regulatory body is, it's the higher education, who they have to have approval from in their state. So keeping up with those is very important. And your accreditor, obviously, having knowledge of all of what those requests and requirements are. And some programs have multiple types of accreditors. They have institutional accreditation, program accreditors. You may be doing, accreditor for your CE. So, and then any other approvals that you need to have, the state offices of OEMS or the State Higher Education Commission. So lots of things to do in the administrative side. But I have to say, having done that for a long time, and we know that there's a lot of turnover both in EMS instructors and then also in program directors, program managers. I mean, I really think there's such rewarding roles. I think it's so, if you look at the big picture, all of the students you're graduating, all of the patients they're touching, what a public service it is. So I know we get caught up in the day-to-day, but it's a great job. So I'm going to stop there. So questions or comments or things in the chat? Anybody want to get unmuted and add your perspective, or say, you can say, Pat, you're crazy, because I actually enjoy that when people say, oh, you're so off base there. Matthew?
Yeah, attendees, you are in mute only mode. So if you would like to go into the Q&A or go into the chat and type any questions that you have, please do so now. We got Pat here with her knowledge and expertise for a few more minutes. So please use this time to ask some questions.
And while you're looking for questions, I'm just going to scroll through the chat. Jody said one of the characteristics is approachable. I did not have that on my list. I actually have a list of like 29 attributes that I share with folks. And approachable is so important. As I said, you're not their friend, but you need to be approachable. So somebody inspired me, inspired me to do better. That's great. Took extra time after class to help out. So important. Cared about me as a learner. Boy, students know that. Students really do know that. Positive, enthusiastic. Any questions coming up as I'm doing this, Matthew?
Looks like Sean said he has a question. So Sean, if you just want to type that in real quick to the Q&A or the chat, we can get that answered for you.
Here's I don't know if it's the same Sean, said I'll be a new instructor soon in the next few weeks and I'm a little nervous. I'd be worried about you if you weren't a little nervous because it is nerve-wracking to get up in front of a bunch of students, but deep breaths, deep breaths. Ineffective, and again, I'm just still looking at some of the chat. Low energy, reads directly from slides. Can't explain what's beyond the slide. So important. Thank you.
Looks like Sean just posted his question and he says, I'll be starting my first instructor job soon. How do you remember slides so you're not looking at the slides constantly?
And that's one of the downsides of slides is because it's like a magnet, it just draws your eyes over to the slides. One of the techniques, if it works for you, and it doesn't work for everybody, and it depends on how your classroom is set up and how much space you have, is to be able to walk around the room so that you're seeing students, but you also can see what's up. You can glance periodically at what's on the screen. If you stand in front of the screen next to the, in front of the class next to the screen, it's just so easy to be looking. I like to use where you can, and I try in many presentations have gone to using as many pictures as I can, that will trigger for me what the content is. I do not do well trying to stand and see what the notes section is on my, on the bottom of the slides, because I'm never going to be able to read it or see it. And it's going to look like I'm reading it or seeing it. And I think the other thing is just sort of cut yourself some slack. I can't tell you how often I finish some kind of presentation. I think, oh, I meant to say this, or I didn't do that. And you let it go. It's like, I'll try to remember to do that next time. Or you can bring it up to the class the next time. Say, hey, last class session, I meant to talk about this and I forgot about it. So hope that's a little bit of a help. And maybe somebody else has an idea about, about the whole slide thing.
Yeah, great question, Sean. If anybody else has any questions, please type them in. Robert says, I also do not stand at a podium or lecture and keep the students engaged. It's a good point, Robert.
Yeah, I mentioned about having a U setup, which is very helpful, but if you have a really large class or a small classroom, that doesn't work. But even if you can walk around the classroom, I know one of my, used to be a EMS instructor here in our state, and we used to do instructor classes here. And, Michael was so good at engaging students, and he had the ability to just continue to walk around. He always knew what he was going to say. Walk around the classroom, and it made such a, you never knew where it was going to be, and it made such a good environment.
Brandy asked a question. She said, how can you make canned programs, i.e. ITLS, ECLS, interesting for those that have done the course many times while staying in the program time and requirements?
Oh, that is such an excellent question, and I think some of those programs and classes have changed. They've changed certainly their presentation and some of how it's done. Absolutely, one of the most painful experiences I ever had was one of the very first of a canned class that came out, and I won't name which one, but I'd read the book before I got it. I was going to an instructor class, and the instructors had to read the slides word for word. I said, "You are joking. We can't just read the slide." Nope, that's what you have to do, so that it was going to be consistent. I honestly don't have a good example for that. I think you do have to work with whoever you're, like if it's an AHA thing, the regional faculty, maybe get some tips from them. I think it's important to know what you can and can't deviate from the slide decks. And so I think those are really a lot more challenging. So I'm afraid I don't have a magic bullet for you there.
Chris also posted a question. He said, thank you very much. One thing is dealing with is some instructors that more rely on the class to inform them when they are having troubles or want to spend extra time after the class over topics. I am more trying to get them just to do it, stay in the classroom until the very end of the class. I'm trying to get them to quiz the students to see if they really know the material instead of just saying any questions and then move on to the next topic. Any advice?
Yeah, you know, some instructors give quizzes at the beginning of the day. Some of them will give quizzes at the end of the day. So that's another way. Activities are good depending on what class, what level you're teaching and how your schedule is structured. If you're doing a full day, I really like classroom in the morning and lab in the afternoon because our students get sluggish. We all tend to get sluggish in the afternoon, so that they're more engaged. Sometimes you can do a huddle, whether you're doing classroom or you're doing your skills. Sometimes you can do a bit of a huddle and maybe ask the students what's one takeaway that for today. There are different techniques. Some of them will get little whiteboards that the student writes on, or they'll use a note card of some kind. If you're doing something virtually, you can use chat. And what's one takeaway that you had today, or what's one question you had, or what's the muddiest point that you had today. So some way to try to get them to summarize, pull out information that they're going to retain or that they have questions about. So, and making everybody participate. We just did an accreditation workshop last week, and when we do it in person, we always do a go around, and I'm sure after too many classes it would get old, but we go around and every participant has to identify something that they took away from or that they learned today, and it can't be what anybody said prior. So that makes everybody think. Now, if you tried to do that every class day, I'm sure people start rolling their eyes pretty quickly, but I think you can mix up what those activities are.
Awesome.
And I would go back, I think maybe to the point, maybe that's off point, but in terms of having frequent evaluations. And honestly, when I have a new instructor, somebody who's new to that, to doing it, I really want them evaluated like every week. And so if you have class, say 2 days a week or 2 evenings a week or whatever, I want students to be filling out an evaluation every week, because as I said, you need that corrective feedback. It's like, oh, I didn't realize I was doing this. I'm talking over people, for example. Oh, I didn't give them a chance to finish asking their questions. I mean, there's all kinds of things that come up. So doing it frequently is much better. All right. Anything else, Matthew?
That is all that's in there right now.
All right.
So thank you everyone who submitted your questions. And thank you, Pat, for being here with us this afternoon. It was great having you. We appreciate you taking your time and your bringing your wealth of knowledge to everyone here. And everybody who attended, again, thank you. And I will be sending out a follow-up email that will have, again, the link to register for that certificate and seat use for the course. It will also have Pat's contact information on there as well. So if you have any more questions, she agreed to put her contact info out there if you need to reach out to her anymore after this. Again, thank you all for joining us. We hope to see you at a future NAEMSE webinar. And thank you again, Pat. Take care, everyone.
And the best of luck in your career. Thanks.
Thanks. Take care.